Part 2. Skills. There are 2 good skills that I recommend you to level with by starting with the soldier. Number 1 would be Physical Forcewave. I recommend 2-handed version with an ability to spam it with the help of Tremor. Because 1-handed version is trash since it adds cooldown. You need to keep in mind that you can attack faster with Forcewave if you accumulate more casting speed. How much points you want to invest in it? As many as you can. Even go as far as overcapping it later on in the end game. Golden rule of thumb for every primary offensive skill that you are using on any character in Grim Dawn, you want to put as many points as you can. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. On leveling stages, I recommend you to put 16 out of 16 in Forcewave, 12 out of 12 Rending Force. This modifier increases the range of Forcewave as well as adds % critical and physical damage. 12 out of 12 Internal Trauma, which adds flat internal trauma damage and slows down enemies' attacks. Additionally, it gives bleeding to our ability, but our character does not benefit from it. Important thing here, Forcewave has a quote-unquote unique feature. When you are attacking your enemies and they are standing too high or too low on the ground in relation to your character, then even if you have a good hit chance and visually seeing that Forcewave is hitting your enemies, it will not deal any damage to them. Do not be scared, it's not a bug. You just have to move your character higher or lower to start successfully hitting your enemies with it. Number 2 is Physical Blade Arc. It does not really matter whether you want to go with 2-handed or 1-handed version, at least on first 2 difficulties. I do not recommend using 1-handed Blade Arc on ultimate difficulty, because you will not deal enough damage to your enemies. However, it is perfectly fine to utilize Sword and Board playstyle before it. Unlike Forcewave, you can spam this ability without any additional modifiers. Keep in mind that by default you can only hit 5 enemies at a time. This skill does % based weapon damage and bleeding damage in 180-degree arc. Plus it has a slight chance on knocking your enemies from their feet. My opinion of this knockdown mechanic? I do not recommend you to rely on it too much. Since it does not work all the time against all enemy types, it is ill-advised to count on it in battle. However, when it works, the encounter becomes so hilariously easy that you'll be able to keep the target knocked down from 5 to 7 seconds. I am telling you right now, do not get modifier Clean Sweep. While it will increase your damage, it will also add a cooldown to your ability, which is not needed at all. Blade Arc itself you should level at 16 out of 16 points while leveling. On the other side, you want to get to Laceration and level it until 12 out of 12 points. This modifier increases your skill range as well as adds +6 to your maximum number of targets. Additionally, it adds more flat physical and internal trauma damage, plus some critical damage on top. If you ask me, this is a well-worthy addition to initial parameters. Important to note, to attack faster with Blade Arc, you need attack speed instead of casting speed. In my opinion, both of those skills are excellent for beating the campaign. It just depends on your personal taste and preferences. Before moving to the next skills, I would like to give you another useful advice. Usually for most classes while leveling, you want to allocate your skill points in such a way that you will be able to get to the exclusive ability of your main class, or an ability that you want at the end of the mastery bar as quickly as possible. There are some exceptions, like % based resistance reduction abilities, but it's not a rule. This means that for every self-buff, passive, movement and another active abilities, you will put just 1 point in them. Majority of your skill points you should invest into Mastery Bar and your main damaging ability until you get to the exclusive skill or something else. When you have the access to the exclusive skill, you should at least soft cap it before moving to another class and his skills. In our case, we shall rush towards Oleron Rage. Do not worry, you will have plenty of bonus skill points from items and relics to distribute them where you desire, and to get some increase in your strength and defense. Even if you think that you failed somehow, you can easily respec in Grim Dawn with the help of the spirit guide in the game marked by a book on your minimap. What skills are must-have, and what are situational in Soldiers 3? I shall start with must-have passives. Mechanically, all passives works by themselves 100% of the time, or they will activate additional effects when a necessary requirement has been fulfilled. Fighting Spirit is a very good ability that has a chance of activating by itself when your character takes a hit from any source. While it lasts for 8 seconds, you gain flat boost to your offensive ability and percent-based increase for your total damage. The total damage increase strengthens every damage source that you have. It is enough to have at least 1 pointer in it while leveling, and later you should aim for overcapping it as high as possible. In my case, I did it at 16 out of 12 points. Military Conditioning is another very good passive that allows you to improve your health in percent-based numbers, as well as your physique attribute. Upgrading this will allow you to have more defense ability, bigger health pool, and some health regeneration. 1 point while leveling and 10 out of 10 in the endgame. Decorated Soldier will give you more percent-based boost to your physical and internal trauma damage, but the main benefit, in my opinion, is having more percent-based elemental and slow resistances. Some characters have problems against slow mechanic and stun when they are leveling or even at the end game, but luckily Soldier can easily handle this. You want 1 point in it on leveling stage, however, feel free to get it to 8 out of 8 points when you are getting closer to level 100, or even slightly overcapping it if you are not satisfied with elemental resistances. The picture becomes even better when you will take Scars of Battle, an ability that adds percent-based bleeding resistance and reduces stun duration and freeze duration on your character. Important note here is that in Grim Dawn, no matter how high your defenses might be against stun, petrify or freeze, your character will never be immune to them. This means that you will still get hit by those attacks. However, the key difference here is not the fact that you was struck by them, rather how long you will be immobilized. What I noticed is that monsters with stun, petrify and freeze attacks typically do not inflict great damage. Like I said, the main danger lies in the fact that how long they can keep you immobilized, so if you had accumulated good resistances against it, then the character will shake off any of those control effects after a second. Remember that some builds are considered very weak against such threats. Luckily, Death Knight is not one of them. Another useful thing here is increase in your armor absorption. This makes all armor that you are currently wearing much better, by giving you the ability to take less damage from every physical damage source in this game. 1 point in this passive when you reached it while leveling, and later on you should put 8 out of 8 points here, or more if you want to achieve 100% armor absorption with the help of some additional endgame components. More on that later. Finally, the last must-have passive from Soldier skills is Menhir's Will. Keep in mind that it only works if you are wearing a shield or a two-handed weapon. Sadly, no dual wielding allowed. This is your last line of defense, and just like Ghoulish Hunger from Ghoul's Constellation, it only works when your health drops below 33%. Once this proc is active, your character starts to regenerate the health pool very fast, in a span of 10 seconds, both in percent and flat base numbers. With that said, it's not going to make you immortal, and if you are standing in tons of damage over time effects, Menhir's will not save you. However, there are not that many dangerous places in this game, so you should just be on your guard and pay attention to what enemies are doing. It is easy to understand that the more health you have, the greater the healing effect will be from this skill. But I do not recommend you to focus on increasing just the number on your health pool, as well as rely on Menhir's will too much. Like I said before, it is your last line of defense, and if you fail to kill your target, or survive afterwards, especially if your Ghoulish Hunger is out, then it is most certainly a quote-unquote game over man situation. 1 point while leveling, and 10 out of 16 points with two-hander, or 7 out of 16 points with a shield in hand. Now let's talk about other passives that are situational. Shield Training is a passive that you will only use with a sword and board playstyle, otherwise you can skip it entirely. It gives percent base pluses to your shield block chance. Every shield in Grim Dawn has a certain percent of blocking an attack. Shield Training makes it even better. Additionally, it decreases shield recovery time. What do you mean shield recovery? Well, when you block an attack with your shield, your character cannot immediately start swinging back, because he is recovering from an attack with a specific animation. Shield Training allows you to recover quicker and start retaliating back to your adversaries. Honestly, this recovery and blocking animation looks pretty similar to Diablo 1 and Diablo 2. While leveling with a sword and board playstyle, you put 1 point in it, and at the end game you should aim for 10 out of 10 points here. The next situational passive is Veterancy, and I'm going to be honest with you, the next situational passive is Veterancy. It will increase your flattened percent base flat regeneration, plus it gives you bonuses to Constitution, but that's not the main reason why you want this passive for, even though this will work better with Menhir's will. The main reason to invest skill points in this passive is minus percent based physique requirement for armor. Why is it important, you might ask? The answer is the opportunity to invest more attribute points in Cunning to increase our damage. You see, Soldier by default is a very tanky class and does not need that many points in physique to be effective. However, the requirements for the heaviest armor pieces in the game, a la Creek set, are pretty high. I figured why not make things more easier to kill, and instead of dumping most of our attribute points in physique, let's put them in somewhere else. In my case, I decided to invest into Cunning more than half of my attribute points. You can experiment more with this passive, but I think that 1 point per leveling is enough, and 5 out of 10 points at the highest character level is a good choice. Now I will elaborate upon must-have self-buffs for Soldier. Note that every self-buff in Grim Dawn will reserve some energy from your energy pool to be active. And some of those self-buffs can be switched off when your character is running low on energy. Keep in mind that the more points you invest in such skills, the greater will be the energy requirement to maintain them. Luckily, Death Knight does not have to worry about it. Field Command gives you offensive and defense ability, as well as increases armor by a percent base number, just like Decorated Soldier. Same as before, 1 point is enough at the beginning, however, later on you should consider putting here as many spare points as you have, because the benefits for it are huge by endgame standards, and the diminishing returns effect is not that high to worry about it. In my case, I put it in 20 out of 12 points. Squad Tactics is the modifier of Field Command. But for some reason developers have not included a simple word for you in its description. If you read the text, it says, "Inspire your allies to perform to the very best of their abilities." You might be thinking, hold on a second, this says it works for allies but not for my character. Do not worry, it works on both ways. Surely a simple phrase like "you and your allies" would be nice to have, especially for those who have not played this game before. This modifier increases all damage sources in a percent base number, as well as gives more attack and casting speed. 1 point is enough at earlier stages, later on you should keep it at 12 out of 12, because the diminishing returns are not worth to invest in it. More after soft cap. Before talking about Oleron's Rage, which is both an exclusive ability and a self-buff that does not require any energy to maintain its effect, I want to say why you should not pick Menhir's Bulwark, even if you want to play with a shield. In this video, I am recommending you to build a physical/internal trauma Death Knight. Menhir's Bulwark is typically used for physical retaliation builds, because of the added percent base bonuses to all retaliation sources. Sure, it has some interesting features, like percent base damage absorption, that works a bit differently compared to armor absorption, which allows you to take less damage from all of the attacks. Resistance to life reduction, a very rare mechanic which allows you to ignore curses or auras from some enemies that will lower your character health pool. Increase of all of your healing effects, more survivability from all sources, for example passive health regeneration or attack damage conversion to life, and active health regeneration, etc. However, the main drawback here is a very small increase in your physical damage. Again, for physical retaliation builds, a very good choice, but for the type that I am recommending, physical and internal trauma build, it is a subpar option. I sidetracked a bit, so let's get back to Oleron's Rage. This buff gives you more flat base damage over time effect, with internal trauma on all of your damaging sources that your character has, which lasts over 5 seconds. It also improves in a percent based physical and internal trauma damage, and in a similar fashion increases your offensive ability and movement speed, which is a huge benefit for both offense and defense. I mean, who doesn't want to move and kill things faster as well as run like the wind when things go in a bad direction? The moment you get this ability, usually around levels 30-ish, you should aim for soft capping it immediately to 12 out of 12 points. Later on, if you have spare points, you can freely overcap it as high as the game allows you to. Some diminishing returns will occur, but the overall increase in damage and mobility is well worth it in my opinion. In my case, I overcapped it at 22 out of 12 points. It is time to specify soldiers' debuffing and mobility options. Warcry is a great ability, not only for lowering enemies' damage from all sources in a percent number, but also for doing damage by instantly reducing enemies' health pool, as well as taunting your foes, so that you will not have to run to distant targets. Unfortunately, When you only put 1 point in it, the radius on it frankly sucks. This is why I recommend you to upgrade it until 12 out of 12 points, after you'll be finished with Oleron's Rage and your main offensive skill with its modifiers, Blade Arc or Forcewave. The cool thing about it is the fact that the more you progress into the game, the more impact and benefits you will start to see from Warcry. Why is that, you might ask? Well, by default on higher difficulties, enemies will have more health pools and will deal more damage. This is why your Warcry will be your best friend practically in any fight. It also has a deceiving range in-game, meaning that you will be hitting your enemy standing far away from the visual radius of the skill. Because of the fact that this is an AoE attack and a debuff at the same time, it makes perfect sense to attach to it one of your constellations, which works with a percent-based chance of attacking monsters. For instance, Azraka Eternal Sands or Ul'Zad Herald of Korvac. In the end game, you should have no more than 12 out of 12 points for the sake of avoiding huge diminishing returns, which does not worth your investment of spare skill points. Note, I do not recommend picking Terrify as a modifier. While it has a mechanic that reduces all of the target resistances, the number on it is too low for that purpose, and that does not worth any investments. Have I also mentioned that it adds a chance to fear your enemies and make them run like headless chickens, which defeats the whole purpose of taunting them closer to you? Just ignore this modifier. On the other hand, Break Morale is the thing that you should heavily invest into for the sole purpose of reducing targets' physical resistances, which, in case you have forgotten, is our main damage type. It also gives you a chance of silencing your enemies, which blocks their ability to use any skills. This can work on bosses also and other enemy types, but do not count on silence effect 100% of the time. However, I cannot deny that silencing mages and seeing them running towards you in melee is a very funny picture. Since this is your modifier to your Warcry, you will have an ability on demand with resistance reduction all the time. But you might wondering right now, wait a second Alexander, you have talked about percent and flat base resistance reduction, but how do we know which one is better? Generally speaking, every percent base resistance reduction that you have on your abilities, constellations and skills stacks with each other. In our case, we are looking at -% to physical resistances. This makes it tier 2 type, aka percent base RR, which stands for resistance reduction. Flat base resistance reduction works in such a way that if you have multiple sources of it, then the strongest source will override the weakest. For example, we have two abilities, Break Morale and some random glyph that lowers enemies' physical resistance. Break Morale reduces them by 36 and glyph does the same thing but only by 20. If we use them simultaneously, then only the effect from Break Morale will remain active. This is how it works. Also, your flat resistance reduction will not interfere with your percent base type. You can use both of them. Break Morale needs only 1 point when leveling, however, as the game goes further into the end game, I recommend you to max it as high as possible. In my case, I did it at 18 out of 12 points. For mobility, Soldier among skills has the access to Blitz. I think that this is not the best mobility skill because you can only use it on an enemy or destructible environment. Still, this is an option that you will be using to quickly get close to an enemy for the sake of knocking him down and debuff him, or to activate one of your devotions based on chance of attacking your foes. Initially, Blitz has an 180-degree arc of attack, as well as 3 targets as maximum number that you can hit. It does good flat physical and very good percent base weapon damage, so you might be thinking, I will just go instantly with a two-hander to maul everything in front of me. However, you have to remember that this is a mobility skill, not a damaging one, and also when you play with a shield, damage from the shield, yes, shield has some damage value, added to Blitz. I can say that on normal difficulty and on some part from Elite, Sword and Board Blitz did way more damage compared to two-handed versions. But still, the main purpose is to move faster. Its modifier, Blindside, increases the arc of attack by 120 degree, as well as adds +5 to maximum number of targets, which makes it easier to apply from it to a bigger group of monsters. This debuff reduces their defensive ability for 8 seconds, as well as makes them take flat base damage over time effects from internal trauma over 3 seconds, and increases your percent physical and percent based internal trauma damage. Another ability that you can use to apply some procs from your constellations. When it comes to skill points investment, both for Blitz and Blindside, it is more than enough to put 1 point onto them. Currently you're seeing more than 1 point just because I have a lot of extra bonus skills on my gear pieces. As a separate point, let me mention Overguard ability. This is your go-to save mechanism. If you are playing with a shield, it gives you flat damage absorption, which lowers all of the incoming damage, increases your health regeneration by percent-based amount. That can be good both as a standalone thing, or even better with Veterancy and Menhir's Will. Minus percent-based shield recovery time, this allows you to attack faster after blocking. Reduces stun duration, allows you to recover quicker when your character is stunned. Adds percent-based number to shield damage blocked. Every shield has certain amount of damage that it blocks. With Overguard, you will significantly increase it. Chance of stun retaliation is a decent mechanic. It will allow your character to instantly perform a counterattack with a shield that looks like a shield bash to stun your enemies. However, it's not the most useful thing here, because the further you go into the game, the more enemies will have a very high stun resistances. The answer to this ability is pretty simple. If you want to go with the Sword and Board build, then you should take it. Otherwise, ignore it completely. This skill has a relatively long cooldown, so you should keep track on your timer when you are using it in battle. I recommend to use it only in life or death situations. If your health drops below critical numbers and your Menhir's Will, Ghoulish Hunger were activated, or when you know that you are about to take a massive amount of damage in area from enemies or their abilities with no way to avoid it. While leveling, it is enough to invest 1 point into it, and later soft cap it until 12 out of 12 points. We are done with soldier skill points as well as how much points they should have both for leveling and endgame. Now let me tell you about the skills that you need to get to from Necromancer. Spectral Binding is your first must-have skill, which is a self-buff. Of course, when it becomes to bonuses, I cannot deny that the most value from this skill you can only get when your character based around ether damage, because it gives both flat and percent-based bonuses. However, even physical builds can get something useful out of it, which is an increase of your total health number, as well as pluses to your total number of offensive ability. Keep in mind that just like Field Command, this self-buff requires some portion of your character's energy to maintain its effect. I recommend you to put 1 point in it at the moment you get it, and then level it as high as possible, especially if you have a problem of getting extra offensive ability and the health in the end game. In my case, I overcapped it at 13 out of 12 points. Spectral Wrath is a modifier to Spectral Binding. It functions as a debuff, which empowers it by giving your character an ability to summon ghosts automatically to deal damage to your enemies and lower their resistances. The damage part is not the most important thing here, since ghost attacks are not strong and they attack with flat vitality and ether type, which our character is not benefiting from. But the part which allows them to shred enemies' defense, especially by lowering enemies' physical resistance and attack speed in a percent based fashion, is the most valuable option here. One thing to note, this debuff lasts quite long, and each consecutive attack from target that got debuffed initially will reset its duration. However, this skill works in a small radius, even when you will overcap it. This means that sadly you cannot activate it when someone shoots at you standing full screen away. The moment you get to this modifier, I suggest you to level it as high as possible and overcapping it later. This will give you an insane boost to all of your damage, even if your character is using not very good equipment, especially against heavily armored foes with additional physical resistances. For example, Mammoth Colossus or Titans. In my case, I overcapped it at 17 out of 10 points. Mark of Torment is a safe ability, meant for using only in life or death situations, or to absorb huge amount of damage from all damage types, as well as retaliate some percent of this damage back to your attackers. It functions like this. You will mark a target and you will see a visible line between you and your marked enemy. As soon as this thing has happened, your damage absorption has started to work, along with damage retaliation. Even if you are not being attacked by marked target, you will still preserve your defensive boost. However, if you will accidentally kill a marked target, then even if you still have some seconds left from its duration, all of your defensive bonuses will vanish. I think that when you are going through normal difficulty with your Death Knight, you should not have to worry about damage absorption, assuming you are not playing recklessly and upgrading your resistances with your gear. But this does not mean that if you want to be rather safe than sorry, nothing stops you from putting as much points here as you want, while leveling to get it to 5 out of 10 points or 7 out of 10 points. In the end game, I recommend you to soft cap it to 10 out of 10 points to get the most benefits from it. And there is no need to even think about overcapping it, because this diminishing returns is insanely strong. I have finished highlighting skills both for Necromancer and for Soldier. Now it's time to talk about items that you want to look for on all difficulties, their stats, which factions are most beneficial for physical damage builds.